Hello everybody, Tracy White here, T Earl or Turl on the UE4 forums and whatever video game I happen to be playing at the time. You might catch me in Fortnite, maybe. All right, so it's been a long time since I've done a video, so I thought I've been real busy. I work for a large project engineering management firm, and we mostly do like infrastructure projects, bridges and roadways and tunnels and stuff like that. Um, but we got into the real-time visualization. I've been spending a lot of time on that and developing some tools and techniques. And I thought I'd go ahead and share that with you. I'm not sure how this first one is going to apply to a video game, but you might find a good way to apply it to whatever you're doing. So this is just kind of a technique that we use to take a skeletal animation that has an animation sequence along with it, and we can play the animation, pause the animation, scrub the animation, and this blueprint that we use in order to do this is used over different streaming levels whenever we're doing construction sequencing and phasing to show, okay, in this phase, this is what's going to happen. In the next phase, that's what's going to happen. And this is just a really great way that the engineers and whatnot can fly around and actually in this case the rest of the scene isn't in there, but they're worried about how this crane is going to clear surrounding structures and everything like that, so they're able to see how it's going to work and the sequence that it'll go in. So it's pretty handy little technique that we're using. Not using sequencer, again, it's a blueprint, and we're using anim sequences that we brought in with the skeletal animations. All right, so I want to go ahead and jump straight into this. I'm going to load up a blank level. So first things first, I'm going to show you the character that we use. So we have our own custom character that we've used, or that we use in all of our projects. It's got a lot of stuff built into it already. Um, I might get into some of this later on, but basically the only thing that the character is going to do here is spawn in a widget that I have called Anim Scrubber, and I'll show you the widget here in a minute, and then make sure that our cursor is showing and add that to the viewport. So that'll allow us to have the cursor showing. We're able to look around, and the widget is added to the scene. Obviously, it's not doing anything yet. We'll get around to that. So that's all the character's doing. All right. Next thing I want to show you is the scrubber widget. Where is it? It is called the Anim Scrubber. Now this is probably the simplest widget that you've ever seen in your life, or not. All it has in it is two buttons and a time or a slider bar. So the two buttons are play and pause, and then I have my scrubber, which I call animation timeline. So just for kicks and giggles, I put a greater than sign for the play and two capital I's for the pause. Obviously, whenever you're going to be doing a project, you're going to want nice graphics in there, so ignore my cheesiness. Okay, so no big deal on play and pause. They're both bound to on clicked event, and then the animation timeline is bound to a on value changed event. We'll look at that in just a second, but very important that the slider is also bound to the value of it is bound to a function called animation timeline, get animation timeline value. Okay, so in order to create this binding, you can simply you know arrow down. There's nothing in here by default, and then create your binding. Whenever you create a binding, what's going to happen is you'll get an input node and an output node, return node. For this particular function, I added to my return node an output value, and that output value I've named return value, and it is a float. The other thing, and by the way, I'm in the graph now. The other thing on this widget is I've added a variable, and you can just in your variables panel here add a variable. It is a float, and I call it slider position. So in this function, I take slider position and then I feed it into the return value of this node, and what that does is it updates the value of the slider. That's why if I were to push play right now, the slider doesn't do anything. There's no, since it's bound to an external value, you can't do anything with it right now. All right, in my event graph, I've got three events. My play button, my pause button, and my value change on my animation timeline slider. These are calling event dispatchers. Event dispatchers are what we're going to use to communicate with our blueprint that has been placed in the level. So event dispatchers are really easy. Over here in your side panel, you can add an event dispatcher and have it, name it whatever you want, and we'll call it later from another blueprint. Okay, the unique thing about this one event dispatcher, this one right here that I call, which is update slider, is I have added an input to it. I've called that input frame second. For whatever reason, you can call it whatever you want, and that is a float value. Remember that slider is a value from 0 to 1. You can think of it from 0% to 100%. And we'll be using that to do a little bit of math in our blueprint in just a second. Okay, and then whenever you call these events, you just drag them in and you can do a call, and there you go. All right, so that is our widget. If you have any questions on the widget, ask in the comments and I will address that whenever I can. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a blueprint. I have one already made, and it's my cheater blueprint that is off to the side so I don't forget anything. But what we're going to do is we're going to create this blueprint from scratch. Create blueprint, actor, and we're going to call this BP anim sequence toot for tutorial. All right. So there's nothing in here yet. What we're going to add to this one root component is going to be a skeletal mesh. And because we don't need the default scene root here, we'll just drag that on top of there, and now all you got's a skeletal mesh. All right, so we're going to give a default value. We use 3ds Max for our visualization 3D work. For doing all our animations and modeling and stuff. So we put this animation together in 3ds Max. We exported FBX along with its baked down animation. Whenever we imported into UE4, we brought in the skeletal mesh and its animation. So we're going to use approach span demo northeast. And that's our skeletal mesh right there. The other thing we're going to do with our skeletal mesh real quick is tell it to use an animation asset. And the asset that we brought in with it obviously was called approach span demo northeast anim. And you can see automatically that takes off playing. For our particular purposes, we did not want this to autoplay nor loop, so we turn off autoplay and loop. Compile. And that's really all we needed in our viewport. So we'll head over to the, we don't need to do that in the construction script. We're going to go over to our event graph. And then as a couple of things to start setting up for our event graph, we're going to add a couple of variables. One, I'm going to have a widget reference because we're going to be, telling the slider where to go. That information is going to be coming from this blueprint. So we need a widget reference, and I'm just going to reference our what do we call anim scrubber. So yep. Another variable that we're going to need is a new um, variable for a new skeletal mesh. So let's just call it new skeletal mesh. Did I spell that right? Skeletal mesh. Okay. We're going to make this public because this is something whenever you drop the blueprint in the scene, you want whoever's dropping the blueprint in the scene to assign whatever skeletal mesh and animation that they want to this blueprint. We do that because we use the same blueprint in different phases of this sequence. So there's different animation sequences and stuff. So the different stages of construction we go through will assign different meshes and animations to it. So this is going to be a skeletal mesh. That's the type. We're going to add another variable, and this one is going to be called anim sequence because we are going to want to change that eventually. And change the type to, whoops, anim sequence. All right, the other two variables that I want to do is active. This is going to be a Boolean. I use this for various reasons. For one, we in this particular project we have some stages of construction where anim's not used, and so we want to disable it during that time. And the other one is going to be animation length, because we want to know how long in seconds this animation is. This is going to be a float value. All right, that is all we need for this this thing. All right, I want to. I got to put a delay in here because the way this tutorial works, the character gets spawned in at the same time as the blueprint is spawned in, and sometimes, depending on the timing, sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. It will try to make references before the other blueprint is read in or something. So I'm going to hook up a delay, and just a very slight delay. What that does is allow my character to come in and do its thing, namely creating the widget and adding it to the viewport before this blueprint tries to access it. All right, from there we're going to do a sequence. And in our sequence, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take our animation sequence. I'm going to go ahead and default that and my new skeletal mesh to what we actually defaulted to, but it can be swapped out later. Okay, so I'm going to take my animation sequence, and then I'm going to get play length. And then from there, I'm going to set my variable, my play length variable. What this is going to do is for this animation, because different animations will be different lengths, we're going to set the play length. What this will do is it'll allow us to do a little bit of math and make our timeline scrubber go from 0 to 100%, or 1 second to 88 seconds, or 200 seconds, or whatever it happens to be. All right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get all widgets of class, and of course that's going to be our anim scrubber. Even though we have it set by default, the particular one that's spawned in won't be we have to actually get a reference to that. So we're going to get all widgets. There's really only one of them, so we're not really worried about doing any sort of for each loop or anything like that. We're just going to get the widget at index 0, and we're going to set our reference, and that is it for that. Add one more pin, and then I'm going to set active. So like I said before, that set active is for other reasons, trying not to get because there's an event tick on this. We don't want the event tick to go live until we're ready for it to. Maybe you want to set it inactive from another blueprint or from your widget, if there's no associated animation to go with the skeletal mesh that you're using. Not a big deal. All right, from there we're going to take our viewport skeletal mesh and animation sequence, and we're going to set the animation. I'm going to have to back up and do a little construction script stuff before we get to the final spot, but no worries. All right, now we're going to take our widget reference. We're going to be pulling out our event dispatchers, so we want to bind our event dispatchers. We have our play. We want to do bind, pause, and bind slider update. So play button, pause button, slider update, right? All right, so we'll just tie all this together and it will be good. All right, that's from our widget. Okay, now we need events to bind this to, so I'm going to create a custom event. This will be called play anim. Another custom event. This will be pause anim, and one more custom event. And this will be scrub anim. All right, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. We need to connect our bindings, and then what you're going to find on this slider update is it will not bind. And it will not bind because that event, if you recall, on our widget has a input node. It's a float value, so we need to have the same thing on our custom event. So on scrub anim, we're going to add an input, and we're going to call this frame seconds or whatever, frames or seconds or whatever, and that is a float value. Now, because it has the event has to have that float value, we're able to bind that event now that we have one in our input for the custom animation. All right, so reference to skeletal mesh. I do want to mention real quick that what we were using before is override animation data. Worked great in 4.18, but whenever I moved to 4.19, this node stopped working. And I could have used that for play, pause, and scrub. Not a big deal. There's other nodes that work just fine for this. So for example, for play, we want to do play animation. We're going to tell it to use this anim sequence that we're designating as what we want to play, and that will play our animation. So we'll get another skeletal mesh reference for our pause. There is a stop, but I don't use stop. I use set play rate, and if you set the play rate to 0, it'll stop. We'll see a upcoming problem with play animation node here in just a second. All right, and then again for the scrub, we're going to, if we do a set play, I'm sorry, not play rate, but position, set position, that'll set our animation position, and we'll feed something in here in just a minute. So just to let you know real quick, I'm going to go ahead and set my play rate for this to 0 because in our particular project we wanted, whenever you grab that timeline and scrub it, we want to pause the animation. So I'm going to set that to pause the animation anytime you use the slider to scrub the animation. All right, so we're going to go ahead and hit compile. And then the next thing I want to do real quick is I want to visit the construction script, and I want to make sure that we're able to set our skeletal animation or skeletal mesh and animation to whatever we want to in the blueprint when you drop it into the level. So we're going to set skeletal mesh. Oops, sorry. Set skeletal mesh. It is the function thing here. And then that's going to be set to our new skeletal mesh, and I'll show you how that works in just a second. All right, so back over here, we have our anim sequence tutorial. We're just going to drop it into the scene and center it up. So if I look at my scene settings here, you can see, because I've exposed these two values, I can, if I wanted to, I could change this skeletal mesh to an animation to the other one, which is a demolition of an old tower that they're pulling down. But for time's sake and for now, we're just going to keep it on what we started with. All right, so the thing is in, the blueprint's in. I'm going to do a little pie here, and you can see that I can play the animation, and I can stop the animation or pause the animation. I can even scrub doesn't work, and I'll show you why in just a second. The problem is if I hit play, every time I hit play, it starts at the beginning of the animation sequence, and I don't want that. So we're going to go back to our blueprint and take a look at why. All right, real quick. Nope, not real quick. So what we're going to need to do is do another set position for this skeletal mesh. This is on our play side of the execution chain here, and we'll need to do a set position, and we'll grab that information in just a second. Okay, back over to the scrub timeline. Remember, we have our input of frame seconds. Now this is a value of 0 to 1, and we have our animation length that we got way up here at the beginning. So this is the length of the animation that's currently playing. And what we need to do is we need to multiply our float value from the event that's on the UMG slider thing by our animation length, and then that's going to feed into position. And so what that's going to allow is for us to use the scrub to scrub the animation, though you can see the handle of the scrub bar is not moving. The reason for that is, remember, the value for the handle is tied to a function on the UMG, which is something that we'll need to set. But at least the scrubber's working, right? That's a good thing. Okay, we're going to take our tick. I'm going to do a branch, and if the thing is active, we're going to do some fun stuff. Math, not really. It's very, very simple. So first things first, we'll take our static mesh. We're going to get the position, and that's that's the wrong one. We're going to get position, and this is the position of basically the position of the playhead on the animation that's assigned to this skeletal mesh. We're going to take our animation length, and then we're going to divide the two. And what this is going to do is give us a value from 0 to 1, which is exactly what the slider needs on the UMG. It doesn't need 0 to 1 million frames or whatever. It needs a value from 0 to 1. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is take our widget reference, and we're going to go ahead, because remember we had a value over there called slider position, so we're going to go ahead and set the slider position to this value on the tick. And so whenever we play, Now the handle on the slider will slide with us. Yay! Okay, last thing we're going to do before we move on, actually last thing we do before we end this video, which is awesome, is we're going to also feed this slider position into our set position on our play side. So what that will do is if I hit play, it'll play. If I hit pause, it'll pause. It remembers where it's at right now. So if I hit play, again, it didn't set. My bad. That's because I didn't hook it up to the right thing. I forgot a vital piece of math, which is taking the animation length, multiplying the slider, because remember the position of the animation is actual frames, not a value from 0 to 1. So we need to multiply that back by the length of the animation. Okay, now we can scrub wherever the timeline is on the scrubber. That's where it will play from, and pause and play and pause and play. It does not play back from the beginning again. So now we have this great setup here where we can scrub our animation, we can play our animation, and we can pause our animation. This was great for engineers because they like to fly around and go, ooh, is that clearing structures? Is that really going to work? You know, and stuff like that. So real quick, let me show you the beauty of having this as a blueprint. Going to reassign different skeletal mesh and sequence. We'll go ahead and turn our guy character to start by looking that way. And just because I like it to play in a window, we're going to play in the window. So same blueprint, right? Different skeletal mesh, different animation, same functionality. This one I can tell you is a much longer animation, but you can see still 0 to 100%, which might be 200 seconds instead of 88 seconds like the first one was. So that's the reason that we use blueprints, because whenever we change stages of construction, it's the same blueprint, just reassigning the skeletal mesh and the sequence. All right, I hope that's useful for you. Again, I don't know how you're going to use it in a video game, but you might find a use for it. I don't know. But if you're doing any kind of visualization work that you have some skeletal animations or whatever, and you want to know how to control them just through blueprints instead of using sequencer, this is it. It works for us, and I hope it helps. If you have any comments, leave them below, and thanks for watching. Goodbye.